The topic today is how to effectively manage the sales lead follow-up process. Let's actually outline the common situations that you can end up in when you're trying to follow up with prospects. You might be calling a prospect and they answer your call and they say they're busy and they ask you to call them back, and then you end up trying to follow up with them, trying to get them back on the phone. You might have had a meeting with the prospect and now you're trying to follow up to get to that next step in your sales process. You might have sent them a proposal or a quote and you haven't heard back, and now you're following up with them to see what the deal is. Or you followed up with a prospect and they said that they were going to maybe move forward or make a decision, and you keep checking in with them and they keep pushing you out. They keep delaying making a decision. So those are some common situations. I would assume that if you're here, you're watching this, that you can relate to those. And if you can, what you might be doing is when you end up in those situations, most people you end up following up with periodic phone calls. You send them emails, you leave voicemails. I think for most people it's reasonable that the timing of these calls or these reach outs is fairly sporadic and maybe fairly random. There's not really clear logic as to, okay, I'm going to follow up at this exact time. It's just sort of, let me try to push these people through our pipeline. And I think what I can relate to is you often have prospects that don't answer your calls and don't reply, and you just sit there in this endless cycle of continuing to follow up, not really knowing what's going on. And when you're in that process, you can end up asking some of these questions to yourself, which is, when should I call this person? How often do I try to follow up? What is the best way to follow up to try to get a hold of this person? Do I keep calling this person? I mean, they seemed interested and now they're being completely silent. Why are they being silent? Do I keep calling them? Am I calling too much? Am I calling too little? What do I say when I reach out to this person? And so those are some questions that you could end up asking yourself, and you don't need to remember all this. I'm just sort of trying to level set that this is, the angle that we're trying to, hit at and trying to help you with today. And if you end up sort of going through those circles and those cycles and have those questions, the problems that can arise from this are you end up following with prospects that don't need what you have. So what I would call these are low qualified or unqualified prospects, and you're basically wasting valuable time trying to call them. You might end up not saying the right thing when you do follow up with a prospect, because what I mean by that is that you might follow up with them and they push you out 3 months, and maybe there's something different you could have said to where they don't push you out for 3 months. Are you handling that push out? Are you handling the follow up in the right way? So that, or let me go at it from another angle. You follow up and the prospect doesn't respond to your emails or to your voicemails. Maybe you're not saying the right thing in that follow-up process, and that's why you're not hearing back, or you're not having progress. And at the end of the day, you might be following up too much, meaning spending valuable time on bad leads, or you might not be following up enough. You might think, oh, they're not interested, they're not calling me back, and you don't call that prospect back. Then they reach a point where the no becomes a yes. They haven't heard from you and they forgot about you, and then they end up giving the business to someone else. So those are some problems that can arise. Hopefully we can help you to minimize some of those today, and there might be other problems that you can add to that list. But the way that we're going to try to approach this is, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to work with you to establish clarity with the prospect that you're pursuing. And so we'll dive deep into that. We're going to talk about what to say when you do follow up with prospects. We're going to try to help you to avoid the follow-up process altogether. We'll talk to you a little bit about doing a takeaway, and we'll explain what that is. And then we'll share with you sort of a passive follow-up approach. And so this will be our agenda here today, and we'll start with establishing clarity. And so one thing that I want to point out is that if you look at when you're following up with a prospect, if you really just go with what you want to accomplish, ultimately what you want to accomplish is you're following up because you want that prospect to buy from you. You want to close the sale. But the reality is that you're working that prospect through your sales process. And so this is a graphic that we use a lot to sort of try to simplify some of the key steps that you might take a prospect through, from everything from an initial contact to an appointment to a presentation. And what you need to think about is when you're in this lead follow-up process, you're typically in between these stages, or you're after one of these stages. You've called a prospect, you might have had a brief conversation, and now you're following back up. You had an appointment, now you're following back up. You gave them a presentation, you gave them pricing, now you're following up. So I just want you to, a key thing to keep in mind is that there is this process here. So you're not trying to close the sale and follow up to close the sale. What you need to always keep in mind is you're following up to close the prospect on moving through these stages and moving to the next step. So that's just something to keep in mind at an extremely high level. But again, we're talking about clarity. So and getting clarity as to what's going on with your prospect. And I'll show you why that's important. But the best way to get clarity is to ask questions. And we believe here that the best salesperson is the one that asks the best questions. I'm going to talk to you about 3 types of questions. Pre-qualifying questions, which are basically light qualifying questions that just determine, does it even make sense for us to talk? Is there even the hint of a fit or need? I'm not necessarily confirming that this person needs what I have, is ready to buy, can buy, and everything. I just need to know, are they in the vicinity? Because if they're not even in the vicinity, then I'm not going to spend my valuable time with them. So that's what pre-qualifying questions help you with, and I'll explain that more. Hard qualifying questions are those questions that determine, okay, is this deal for real? And then closing questions are closing questions, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Let's dig into those 3 categories in a little more detail. Pre-qualifying questions, like I said, we're just trying to determine, is there a potential need or fit? And at the most basic level, one way to look at this is that if your product solves some sort of problem, does the prospect have that problem? And an example that I've started to use, because in these training webinars I've used different examples, and I'm not really sure which one resonates the best because we all sell different products. I've started using an example of selling a gym membership, because either like to a workout facility, because I think that either some people might either belong to a gym and they can relate to it, and if you don't belong to a gym, then you might be able to relate to some of the reasons, some of the pain points of why someone might need to go to a gym. So maybe this is something that everybody can relate to. But so I'm going to kind of use that as an example as I explain some of these concepts. But like I said, if you're trying to determine, does the prospect have the problems that I can help with? Because if they don't, then I could try to talk them into wanting what I sell. But if they don't have the problems, then I'm going to have a difficulty selling them what I have to offer. And when we're talking about the lead follow-up process, when you're following up and spending your valuable time trying to pursue leads, you want to spend that valuable time with people that need what you have, that might need what you have, versus just chasing people that are going to be hard to sell to. So some common pain points if we want to sign people up to a gym or to a fitness club. Some common problems that they might experience are that they aren't happy with their physical appearance. Okay, so maybe they're overweight. They need to lose weight, get in better shape. It can be difficult to get on and stay on a workout schedule. They're not healthy and don't feel good. They do not have a very good self-image and level of self-confidence. So those are pain points. And you think about it, if someone has those, then it's going to be easy for us for us to sell a gym membership to that type of individual. Now, If they don't have any of those, then we don't want to spend our valuable time with them, and we don't want to put that person in our lead follow-up process. Where I'm getting at with this is that those leads that you follow up on and they never respond to you, and you're like, just, this person never responds. Sometimes it's because they don't need what you have. So that's why you want to start to think about, do they have the problems that you have? And one way to identify if someone has those problems is when you do talk to them, to ask them questions to determine if they have those problems. And for each problem that you help to fix, you could ask a pre-qualifying question. So these are questions that align with those problems I just showed you. So how do you feel about your physical appearance or level of fitness? That's a very good open-ended, it's not a yes-no question. Hey, how do you feel about, your fitness and appearance? If they say, I'm great, I don't have any problems. And you know what the thing is you might look at them and you might think that, hey, this person could stand to lose some weight, but the best way to figure out what's going on in their head is to ask them, what do you think about it? Because if they say, I feel great and I have no problems, then their reality is different from what you think and assume that they might be in. So that's why these questions are good. Asking the questions to see if they have the pain is good versus assuming they need or assuming they want what you have. How important is it for you to get in better shape? How much difficulty do you have staying in a workout routine? Do you feel your overall level of health or how you generally feel on a daily basis? How do you feel about that? How would you describe your image of yourself or your level of self-confidence? Think about someone who sells gym memberships, right? They probably talk about the equipment and the amenities. What great questions here to add to that, which is really finding out the emotions and what's going on in that person's mind. I'm going to show you how this applies to sales follow-up, but if you want to build, if you think, I should ask more questions like that for my product, then here's the process that you can go through is you can basically start with thinking about the product you want to sell, then think about the benefits that product offers. For each benefit, there could be an associated pain point. It's typically kind of like the opposite. You improve this thing, well then there's this challenge that's decreased or this challenge that's going on. For each challenge or pain point, you should be able to think of one or two probing, pre-qualifying questions. So that's how you can come up with that list for your product. Now, I will tell you, of course, I represent SalesScripter. SalesScripter actually takes you through that process. So it's going to help you to identify, okay, what is it that you sell? How does it help? What are the problems it helps to fix? What are the questions that you should ask? And it's going to walk you through that. Now, when you come up with your questions, let's look back at the sales process. There's two key times that you're going to want to ask these pre-qualifying questions. On an initial contact, you make a 2 to 5 minute cold call, you get a prospect on the phone, great time to ask those pre-qualifying questions. You schedule an appointment, go back to that list of pre-qualifying questions. Great way to sort of sit down with someone and say, hey, let me learn a little bit more about you. How do you feel about this? How important is this? So that's where you use these pre-qualifying questions. I showed you that SalesScripter will walk you through that process. Once you actually dump that knowledge and those answers into SalesScripter, it's going to create a call script and an appointment script and whatnot. So, like, here's an example of part of a call script for selling gym memberships. I help people that are looking to lose weight, to look and feel better, lose weight, stay on a workout schedule, get a healthier lifestyle. By the way, I just want to point out, you might start to sell to someone and they are already in good shape, but they still might be a prospect for the gym. Well, then they're going to need a different set of questions, because for them it's not about losing weight. It might be about getting to the highest level of physical performance or whatever, or changing gyms. You might be able to sell them on pain points of their gym isn't clean and yours is clean. So it's different pain points. Where I'm going with that is that your questions and script can change when you change from one type of buyer to another. So you change from a person that's overweight, not currently working out to someone who works out but belongs to another gym, totally different sales pitch. So in your world, you might sell the same product to different people, but when you start to think about those different buyers, different pain points, different benefits, different sets of questions. Anyway, Sales Scripter can separate those different, what we would call those campaigns. We would separate those and keep those separate for you. But this is an example of a call script. Like I said, in the sales process, these questions can come up. A great place for them is in your call script. I also said a great place is to bring those questions up in your appointment. So here's an example of an appointment script that Sales Scripter produces as well, and you can see here right at the opening, pre-qualifying questions. Let's move on to hard qualifying questions, because at some point we need to get beyond, okay, is there even a slight fit? At some point we want to determine, is there a really good fit? Because I might not want to go travel to present to a customer if there's not a good fit. I might not want to continue to follow up with a phone call periodically if there's not a good fit, because my time's very valuable. So the way that we determine, is this prospect a lead legit, for real, really good fit, is we might start to look at 4 key areas. Is there a need to purchase? Meaning, how bad does the prospect really need what we have? And that kind of takes just the pre-qualifying to the next level. The ability to purchase. So does the prospect have money? It's great if a prospect needs and loves what you have, but if they don't have any money to spend, then it's not a real deal. Do they have the authority to purchase? So maybe they're at a manager level and they really just don't have any decision-making authority. So they don't have the authority to purchase. So then they might be a lead to work, but they're not truly qualified, and that's just something to know, because let me tell you why that's important to know. You may have a prospect that responds to you, schedules a meeting and a demonstration, you give a presentation, they ask all sorts of questions, they love it, and then it goes silent after that. And you don't know why. Everything was great. They seemed so nice and they loved it. And the reason why it goes silent is because that person doesn't have any authority to make a decision. They're at a point where you're asking for the order, right? They've taken you as far as you can. You've invested all this time, and now you're going, where'd you go? And they didn't loop in the person who has authority until the last minute, and they go ask the manager, and the manager shoots them down. They're like, you're crazy. We're not spending that money. And then they're embarrassed to even answer your email because you've spent all this time. You can label that as them disappearing on you and flaking out, but the reality is that they weren't legit. It wasn't a true qualified lead because they didn't have the authority to purchase. And that same scenario can happen with if they don't have money. They might have authority, but they don't have any budget. And intent to purchase means, the true intent to make the purchase, meaning, you're not just at the car dealership killing a Sunday afternoon, test driving cars, waiting for your wife to get her hair done. You truly intend to purchase, to make a purchase. So for those 4 categories, there's questions you can ask, and I'm going to kind of move through this pretty quickly because qualifying prospects is a whole subject in itself. But here are some questions that you can ask. Now, like I said, your pre-qualifying questions help you to determine if there's a need, right? Because you're determining if there's pain. But there's additional questions you can add to that, and these sort of apply regardless of the product. But hey, what happens if you don't do anything? If you're thinking about purchasing this from me, what does your life or your business look like if you do nothing? What does that look like for you? And that's a good question to ask, because if things are okay, then maybe they don't need what you have. But if things are not good, then let's say you have a gym. Let's go back to the gym membership. If you don't get healthier, what does that look like for you? Well, I'm going to continue to be single and not have very many romantic relationships. I'm going to have health problems later in life. Get them to tell you what that looks like. And you're looking for either it looking good or bad. And bad means they need what you have. Is there a date when you need this to be purchased by? That's a great question. That is actually a question that helps you to identify a compelling event. Let's say that someone is looking at a gym membership and you say, is there a date that you want to get healthier by? Or let's say you identify they want to lose 20 pounds. Is there a date you want to lose 20 pounds by? And they say, well, I'm getting married on June 5th. Oh, ding, 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 ding. That's a compelling event. That is a great detail to determine that that's a qualified prospect, and that's a great detail to use in your follow-up, and I'm going to show you how to include that in your follow-up. But that's a good detail to learn. The authority to purchase, this is determining, if the person has the power, right? So what's the decision-making process? Okay, that's good for corporations, but even if you're selling to a husband and wife, hey, how do you guys make decisions? You can find out which spouse is the person who makes decisions, what parties are involved, who's the ultimate decision maker. So good authority questions there. Ability to purchase, is there a budget approved? Is there a budget range you're trying to stay within? So good funding type of questions. Intent to purchase. So another reason why intent to purchase is important, and this is the true intent to purchase from you. Someone might have the intent to purchase, but let me throw a scenario at you. Let's say somebody is about to purchase from your competitor, but before they purchase, they want to get another quote. So they reach out to you and they say, can give us a quote, and we're thinking about buying this, and you get all excited and you spend 3 days working on a quote and a proposal, and you send it over to them and you never hear from them again. And they seemed really interested, and you don't know where they went. And one of the reasons why it didn't go anywhere is because the whole time they intended to purchase from someone else, and they just came to you and they never had the intent to purchase from you. So that's a great example of deals just falling apart and you ending up in this follow-up cycle. And so ways to determine if they have the intent is by asking questions. If you don't ask questions and assume, oh, this guy, this is a great prospect, well, you know what happens when you assume. So ask them, hey, what other options are you considering? How far? And if they say, well, I'm looking at these guys, how far along are you with them? If they say, well, I've been talking to them for 3 months and now they're just talking to you, that's a red flag. How do you feel about them? What do you like about them? How does their system compared with us? Is there a reason why you would choose us? So really good intent questions there. Now, the time that you want to ask hard qualifying questions is you want to ask hard qualifying questions at the appointment stage or the presentation stage, and I was going to say beyond, but probably not beyond too much, because you don't want to get beyond these stages with investing your time if they're not qualified. And you don't want to ask those questions in the initial contact. You don't need to be on a cold call with a prospect and say, hey, are you the ultimate decision maker? Because your goal is to get that prospect to the appointment, and you'll take an appointment with someone that's not the ultimate decision maker, but you might not schedule a presentation with someone if they're not. But that's where you want to ask those hard qualifying questions. Again, these will be provided to you in this. What I'm showing you here is the second half of the appointment script that SalesScripter produces. So SalesScripter is going to give you a really nice appointment script that's going to have your pre-qualifying questions, hard qualifying questions, and more. Now, if you want, I'm just kind of skimming the surface on qualifying, but if you want more information, there's a whole webinar on the topic, and this is a link to where you can watch that. Closing questions. Of course, if you have prospects that are ending up in your follow-up process, if you can improve your ability to close them, then you can decrease them falling into the follow-up process. So here are some tips for closing better. I don't know if you're familiar with trial closing, but trial closing is sort of a test close. So you're not necessarily saying, are you ready to purchase? You're asking other questions just to kind of see where the prospect is at. And so good trial closing questions that you can ask every step of the way, even well before it's time to purchase, is, what do you think about what we've discussed so far? How would that help you? Is this something you could see your employees using? Are we heading in the right direction? and so on. Some soft closing questions. Now, these are good for follow-up because one of the things with following up is that I told you some of the questions with follow-up is when do I follow up and what do I say, and am I following up too much or too little? And what I like to do is I like the prospect to tell me when to follow up. I mean, if we're not closing the deal right now and there's follow up required, when do you want me to follow up with you? If I can't schedule and confirm them for the next meeting or the next step and they're saying, well, check back with me, when do you want me to check back with you? And what's the best way for me to reach out to you? And so if they say, check back with me in the first week of January, okay. From there, I then use that as clarity and their direction as to when to follow up. I'll show you in a minute when we talk about what to say is I include that in what I say when I follow up. There's some soft closing questions as, what direction do you want to go? When do you want me to follow up with you? When do you want to talk again? Those are fairly soft. And then there are hard closing questions, are you ready to move to the next step? I mean, you can take these questions and look at them on your own, but you can try to close the deal again to prevent getting into that follow-up process. Closing questions you should be asking every step of the way in every single conversation you have with a prospect. Now, so I do believe in always be closing. What I don't necessarily agree with is always closing for the product or the sale every time you talk to a prospect. You should always be closing for the next step in your sales process. In the first contact, you're trying to close for the appointment and so on. If you want more info on the topic of closing, here's a webinar, How to Immediately Become a Better Closer. So now I know the topic today is how to follow up with prospects, and we sort of dove into some deep topics there that really don't really deal with following up, right? And so the thing is that I personally believe, and a lot of what we do here is that by doing stuff on the front end, you're going to resolve the problems on the back end. And the problem here on the back end is following up with prospects that don't ever respond. And so if we do the right things on the front end, we're going to clean that up. And that's what I just kind of went through with you. Now, by pre-qualifying, by hard qualifying, and by asking good closing questions, what we're going to do is we're going to prevent ourselves from following up on bad leads because we're going to weed those out. A lot of salespeople won't ask enough or the right questions. Instead, they spend that time talking about the product they sell. And then when they end up in this follow-up process and they just continue to follow up and they don't know, they follow up with every prospect that they've talked to. And so this is valuable time being wasted. So you're able to save that by asking good questions and determining who to follow up with. These questions will also provide clarity of when to follow up by determining, the timeline that they're working on. If there's a date that they need to have everything set up or purchased or a deadline to hit and whatnot. So the other thing I'm going to show you in a minute is by asking those questions, it gives you some good stuff to say when you do follow up. And so that's what we'll move on to here, which might be actually what you're most interested in seeing when you signed up for this webinar. So what to say when following up. Now, I told you that on a couple slides ago, a soft closing question might be, okay, when do you want me to follow up with you, or what direction do you want to go? What do you want to do next? Okay? So if you end up in that situation and the prospect says something to you like, follow up with me in the first week of January, okay? So then that becomes the core of the message when you follow up. And this is whether you're making a call, whether you get them on the phone, whether you're leaving a voicemail, or whether you're sending an email. The central focus of why you're reaching out is they told you to call them in the first week of January. It's very important, or it's very helpful to point that out, that you're following their request. So this helps you to decrease you feeling like you're selling to them, or you're pushing something on them, or you're bugging them. If you really turn it on, you told me to follow up with you now, then you're following their orders. It's almost like you're flipping gears from sales to customer service. I'm doing my part to follow up with you uh, because you asked for it. I mean, I really wouldn't say in those exact words, but when we last where we left off, you said to follow up with you in January. So it's the first week in January, and I'm following up with you. And regarding one of the questions was how many times do you follow up? Because we're turning that more on them. They told us to call them. We can be more liberal in how many times we follow up. So I might call them a bunch of times, and every time I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to go back to their request to follow up. I mean, it might be like in the middle of February, right? I've called them a handful of times. I still might be saying, hey, I'm sorry. It looks like I haven't been able to get a hold of you. I really apologize for that. I know you asked me to call you in the first week of January, so we're in February. So I don't know if it doesn't make sense for us to still talk or not, but I'm still trying to get a hold of you and per your request. So that's one thing to say when to follow up. Another thing that you can say is that you can focus on the pain points that you've identified as the purpose. So remember, I said to ask some pre-qualifying questions, and you can ask those as early as the first cold call. And let's say you ask some questions, and now bear in mind we're following up, so they should have had some of the pain that we were looking for. And if they didn't have the pain, then we shouldn't be making this call. But so let's say you identified here in this. I actually wrote this example with thinking about the gym membership in mind. Hey, when we last spoke, you were concerned about not feeling well and not having a lot of energy. Is that still something you're concerned about? What are you doing to help with that? So that is a pain point that could be resolved by joining the gym. So I'm following up with that pain as the centerpiece of my message. Again, could be used in a call, in an email. Now, another thing that you can use is if we identified if there was a compelling event, which remember that's a date that the prospect is trying to, either purchase by or a deadline that they're trying to reach. Hey, when we last spoke, you said that you were trying to lose 20 pounds by your wedding day. I'm just following up with you. Are you on path to achieve that? Given that we're 6 months away from that, if you wanted to work with us, this would be the point where we would need to start getting that discussion going again, and if that's a deadline that you want to hit. So again, see how that's the flow here is that you ask the good question, you uncover the really valuable piece of information, then you use that information in your follow-up. So we might try to do some things to avoid the follow-up, but if we do end up in that follow-up, it's really good to use this very powerful information. Instead of, think about a gym salesperson who talks about the amenities. They're following up, they're saying, hey, I just want you to know we have the most treadmills of any gym in town. That doesn't hit the right chord, doesn't trigger that alert as a compelling event does. So those are some things that to say during the follow-up process. Now I want to talk to you about how to avoid the follow-up process. And the way that we're going to look at this is that one of the things that can push you into the follow-up process is that you get objections. And some objections that might push you in that direction is, we're not looking at making a change right now. We don't have any budget or money to spend. Call me back in 6 months. Just send me some information. So the top three here are all sort of delay objections. And so it's the delay that puts you into follow-up mode. And I think that if you look at your sales process and those stages, the delay is relevant to them purchasing the product, right? We can't make any change right now. That means that we can't buy your product right now. We don't have money. We can't buy your product right now. call me back in 6 months because I can't buy your product right now. So those are, but if you look at your sales process, you have those stages that you're trying to work through, and the close is not for them to buy the product. So if you keep that in mind, then there are responses that you can use for those objections. So here's a way to respond to those objections to try to keep the conversation going, and instead of getting into the follow-up process. So for the we are not looking at making any changes right now, we do not have budget, call me back, here's a response you can say. Hey, I understand, but if I could ask you real quick, how do you feel about your overall level of health, and or how do you generally feel on a daily basis? So that's one of my pre-qualifying questions. Now, another version of that, it just sort of has like an optional additional statement in there, which is, hey, I understand, and I want you to know I'm not looking to sign you up today. I'm just trying to keep the conversation going. If I could ask you real quick, how do you feel about your overall level of health, and how do you feel on a how do you generally feel on a daily basis? So again, we're redirecting back to our qualifying questions. Now, depending on your questions and whether or not you've asked them, or where you are in the follow-up process, this may or may not be available. I mean, if you've already had an appointment and a meeting, this question right here is actually something that could be asked again. So this isn't actually a good example, meaning you could keep going back to how are you feeling, but your pre-qualifying questions, it might not be a question that you could ask again. So just something to keep in mind there, that if you've already asked your pre-qualifying questions, this option isn't necessarily available. You can also redirect back to your pain points. So for those same objections, someone says, hey, call me back in 6 months. Hey, I can certainly do that. I understand. But let me just check in with you. A lot of people that I talk with, they have some of the challenges with, they're not happy with their physical appearance. They need to lose weight and get in better shape. Do you feel that at all, or you feel you're pretty happy with where you're at? And so then the person might say, well, I probably could lose a few pounds. Okay, well, that's why I'm reaching out, and you could try to schedule the appointment. Now, again, let's say so that works great if you're trying to set the appointment. But let's say that you've already had the appointment where you've already asked the questions, your pre-qualifying questions, and you've determined that they have pain, and you're following up now after that. Then this doesn't really work, but look at the power here is that you can change this to tailor it to them specifically. So you can simply, instead of listing out these generic assumed or common pain points, you can fill them with their pain points. So you can say, if they say, well, call me back in 6 months, or call me back at the end of the year, hey, I can certainly do that. Actually, let me see here. Yeah, so the next slide is what kind of takes this is, actually it's slightly different. So if you were to adjust this with their pain points, it might look something like, the response might be, hey, I can certainly do that, but but I want to go back to what we discussed last time. When we met, you mentioned needing to lose weight and it being difficult to stay on a workout routine, and you weren't feeling good. Are those still challenges you're having, or have those gone away? Well, I'm still having those. Okay, so you're still having those challenges, but you want me to still wait 6 months to give you a call back? You're okay with having those for those challenges? So that's how you customize this response to their pain points. Now here's a very similar approach, which is you're challenging the callback request. So they say, call me back in 6 months. We don't have any budget to spend or whatnot. Hey, I can certainly do that, but I'm a bit confused. You mentioned you have some concerns around pain point. Are you okay waiting another 6 months before looking at decreasing those? So kind of similar to what I just went through. Now, another objection that very commonly dumps you right in the follow-up process is, let's say you call someone and they say, hey, send me your info. And what, they might say this in during like a cold call, and prospects love to use this objection because it gets rid of you, and they don't end up looking like a bad guy. And so here's a response to that. Sure, they say, can you send me your info? Sure, I'll definitely do that. So I know exactly what to send you. Can I ask you real quick, how do you feel about your overall level of health, or how do you feel on generally on a daily basis? Probably could be better. Okay, and then you follow it up with another question. Next thing you know, you've extracted a couple pain points, and then you have something to use to schedule the appointment instead of sending them information. What basically happens with that change in direction is that if you sent them information, you basically spend 15 minutes typing up a beautiful email, you send it over to them, you never hear anything back, and then you end up making 20 calls to this person over the next 2 months with no response and whatnot. So that's what we're able to do here, is we just basically eliminated that, and then we end up in many cases scheduling the appointment instead. So you can see a total change in direction. You can also get that just send me some information sort of later in the sales process, where someone might just not be ready to make a decision, but they're not necessarily trying to blow you off. And so a response here could be, sure, I can definitely send you some information. Actually, there's a lot of information that I could end up sending over to you. If you have some questions about anything, it might be easier or quicker just to talk through it together than instead of me sending over a bunch of information. You can redirect to closing. We're not looking at making any changes right now, so a delay there. And so I'm just going to keep moving due to time purposes. But you can look at these slides and see what those objection responses are about. And also, by the way, you can, that just kind of skims the surface on the topic of objections. But if you want more, you can check out this webinar recording, how to consistently get around sales objections. I want to talk to you about performing a takeaway. So a takeaway is basically, you might have heard the sales takeaway. So a takeaway is basically the exact opposite of trying to talk someone into doing something. So where you might say, hey, this is great, you need this, you're going to love this, do you want to buy this? To take it away is to say, you know what, maybe this isn't the right fit for you. I don't think this is something you'd be interested in. So it's the exact opposite. You're taking it away. Now, some examples of this, might be, hey, it sounds like you guys are doing pretty good over there. Maybe this is not the best time to make this purchase. Maybe this is something that you do not have time for right now. This purchase might be more than you need right now. So you're basically talking the prospect out of buying it. Now, by just hearing that by itself, you might say, well, why would I ever want to take away and not sell or talk someone out of buying? And the reality is that this is an advanced sales tactic, so you don't want to use this lightly. The thing is to use this at the right time. And the right time is basically when the prospect is on the fence. And they're not basically saying no, and they're not saying yes. They're sort of stringing you along, actually. Because if they're saying yes, you wouldn't want to talk them out of it. And if they're saying no, then they're already going. You don't need to talk them out of it because they're already saying no. It's like saying, somebody saying, I want to break up with you, and you say, well, I want to break up with you. You don't need to say that. They've already, it's done. You don't. But using a relationship example, if they're saying, I don't know if I want to get married, but they're not saying I want to break up, then you can, at some point you might say, well, if you don't know you want to get married, maybe I'm not the right person for you. You should know by now. So maybe this isn't the right fit. So a good example there. Now, this is a pretty powerful thing to say, and the reason why we're talking about this in the follow-up process is for those prospects that you talk to them every 3 months, and they keep saying, call me back, call me back, call me back. Well, at some point, you might, call them out on it and say, I mean, maybe I shouldn't keep calling you back. I mean, if this isn't something that is a high enough priority for you, maybe it never will be, or maybe it's not the right fit, or and so you can do a takeaway. And now, when you do that, you're basically you can get one of three reactions. You can get no reaction, which is they just say no, call me back in 3 months. You can They can confirm the takeaway and the disqualification to say, yeah, you're probably right. I mean, it's this is something that we would probably never ever be able to do. And then you save them time and yourself time. Okay, let's agree to be friends. Or they can challenge the disqualification to say, no, 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 I know I keep pushing it off. This is something we need to do. It's been a crazy year. When I tell you to call me back, I want you to call me back, and I have intentions of doing it. Some things will change, so that is there's. And then what's neat about that is they begin to sell you on why it makes sense to move forward. There's a lot to that sort of sales tactic, and we do have a webinar recording on that, how to perform the perfect takeaway, if you want to check that out. Now, the last thing I want to wrap up with is sort of a passive follow-up approach, and what I mean by that is an email drip campaign. And so basically that is an automated email marketing campaign using typically software that sends emails to a prospect over a period of time. And the reason why this is so important, specifically regarding follow-up, is that when a prospect says no, more often than not, no doesn't mean no. It means no, not right now. And this can come up. You may deliver a present. This can come up anywhere in that sales process, in those stages where the prospect says no, we're not ready to move to the next stage, and it's just because they're not ready right then. And there's lots of reasons why. Now, one thing that's extremely difficult. Now, I talked to you about when you have this follow-up process going on, you don't know if you're calling enough, or you don't know when to call. And even if the prospect says call me in the first week of January, that's good, because that can tell you when you should be sure to call the prospect back. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's when the no becomes a yes. Because it might happen before that, or things might move quicker than they thought, or it might move slower. Where I'm going with this is that it's extremely difficult for you to time your manual periodic follow-ups with when that no becomes a yes. And so the better way to do that is to have this passive approach of staying connected and in contact with the prospect, so that you stay fresh in their mind. And that way, when the no becomes a yes, they will think of you. And so it's a whole subject in itself. But if you want, we do have a webinar on that as well, how to build email drip campaigns that convert, and that is the link to it. So that is what I wanted to show you today. Again, the thing is the majority of what I showed you is actually how to keep prospects from following into the follow-up process. But I did provide clarity on when you are following up, how to know when to follow up and what to say and whatnot, and some things you can say to sort of challenge prospects from keeping you in that follow-up process when they give you those objections. So if you want more help from us, or if you like that, a little bit more about us is what we provide at SalesScripter is something called the SMART sales system. And so SMART stands for sales messaging and response tactics. So our methodology, we provide a methodology, and it really centers around teaching people like you or your employees what to say and ask. The words you use are your most important sales tool. A lot of salespeople and business owners think about sales tools like email marketing and CRM and different yeah, different stuff, documents and flip guides and brochures. I believe that the most powerful sales tool is the words that come out of your mouth and the words that you type into your emails. And most companies leave it up to a salesperson to determine what those words are, or to figure out what the best words should be. They teach them about the product and then want the salesperson to combine their personality and experience with the product information in order to know what to say. Well, there's a better way to go, and we've figured it out. We have a methodology that helps you to figure out the best thing to say and ask in all the different sales situations, and you can use our structure and our process to develop that for yourself, and that's using our SMART sales system. And it really, by you saying the right stuff, you're gonna be smart. By you by Because you're smart, you're going to know which prospects to pursue and which ones to walk away from. By being smart, you're going to make a better impression with your prospects. But anyways, there's really three sort of legs to the stool of the SMART sales system. As I mentioned, there's a sales methodology. So what I've shown with you here today has skimmed the surface. I pointed you in the direction of like 4 other webinars. Those are just some of the many training modules that are part of the sales methodology. It's all on YouTube, by the way, for free under the playlist SMART Sales System Training Program, and you can access it for free on YouTube. We have some free ebooks. There's a paperback book that you can buy if you want to be able to have a book on your desk that you can mark up and highlight and whatnot, called the Cold Calling Equation. And so all of that can be accessed through recorded training. We can provide live training, virtually or in person, customized training. The second piece to what we offer is, by the way, we give away a lot of the methodology for free through YouTube, through these webinars. And the reason why we do that is because if you like what we're teaching you to do, you should probably check out our software platform because it aligns with it. I showed you today that we were talking about figuring out the pain points, figuring out the qualifying questions. The software helps you to do that, and then it dumps your information into a library of scripts and emails and tools and CRM functionality and email automation and whatnot. So the third piece to what we provide is sales consulting. So I work with businesses and help them to build their sales pitch, their sales messaging, their processes, and then I work with salespeople one-on-one, providing sales coaching and whatnot. Now, if you're interested in our software, I just want to share some pricing details with you. So the software is $49 per month. By the way, you can get a 40% discount if you purchase for the year, which the reason why that discount is so large is because we have people that use our software in 2 ways. We have some people that just want to get a script and they want to use our system for 1 month. And so that's what the 49 is really designed for, is you want to get your documents and cancel and get out, $49, and you can get a whole bunch of great stuff. Now, there are other people that use our software month after month, and so if there's reasons to do that, like using our email and CRM functionality, and the system creates so many different documents that just keeping them all there instead of downloading them is easier to use. Anyways, but the pricing, the annual pricing fits better because it comes down to like $29. So getting into the $20 to $30 range is where I think it makes sense for our users, but you have to just commit to an annual subscription for that. But there's the sales training you can access at no cost. Now, what we also provide is that I provide a service. I do it myself. It's called a scripter walkthrough, where I'll go through our software with you for 2 hours and create basically your sales pitch. So we're going to identify the benefits that you offer, who you're targeting, the pain points that person might have, the questions you should ask. We go through that process. It's really powerful. I mean, I typically help people to think of benefits and problems and questions that they would have never thought of. Although you can use the software on your own without me to do that, and most of our customers we never talk to, but if you do want, my help, I'm here to help, and it's a $200 service. But the reason why I kind of highlight that is that for basically $250, you can end up with a library of scripts that I have created, that I've helped you to create, and I mean, I've written hundreds of scripts, and years and experience with telemarketing, and I've written books, and so to have me build basically your sales pitch for only $250, and that can be done in about 2 hours time. I mean, you can go from basically having nothing to having everything you need to be a rock star salesperson for $250. Now, of course, that's that if you continue to use the software after 1 month, that would be added on top of that. But I'm just the key thing the thing that I really like about what we have to offer is that there are really small steps that you can take. I mean, if you think I love this methodology and I think that this might help me, we don't have to get married, and you don't have to spend all this money, to figure it out. You can spend $50, to stick your foot in the water and start, getting stuff, going. You like it? Purchase a walkthrough. $250, you're gonna basically have a lot of great stuff. So just want to sort of outline that. And then what I would probably recommend, if you, whether you get the walkthrough or not, if you determine that you want to use the software ongoing as your key sales tool, you want to upgrade to our annual subscription, which will bring you down to $29 a month, probably as soon as you can figure that out. Anyways, here's my contact info. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, follow us on Twitter. And that being said, let me see if there are any questions.